A desert, framed by mountains, like abandoned bones themselves, the dust and arid landscape forming a vast basin, seemingly empty yet full of richness, of history and ritual, home of the Navajo and the Apache tribes. Georgia O'Keeffe's skull painting is often referred to as an obvious symbol of death and the transience of time. But I feel the skull is more about resurrection. It feels powerful and triumphant, and the purity of the flower to me feels like innocence and cleansing, a rebirth. Georgia painted this after a period of mental breakdown, when she'd been spending time between New York and New Mexico. When she returned to Abiquiu, Mexico this time, it was with a new energy. Something had shifted for her, and it's felt here in the symbolism. Not far from Abiquiu, a little further southwest in Sonora, Mexico, and some 15 years later, the anthropologist and writer Carlos Casteneda was venturing into the desert with an indigenous shaman named Don Juan, with whom he discovered the nature of plant medicine peyote and began to explore the reality from a different perspective, within the realms of the Yaqui tradition. Don Juan taught him to notice the signs and symbols and what they represented in this magical world. In The Art of Dreaming, Don Juan tells Carlos, "Most of our energy goes into upholding our importance. If we were capable of losing some of that importance, two extraordinary things would happen to us. One, we would free our energy from trying to maintain the illusionary idea of our grandeur. And two, we would provide ourselves with enough energy to catch a glimpse of the actual grandeur of the universe."
Right now, what the old ones are saying is the veil of forgetfulness has been removed from everyone's brow. And it's kind of wonderful to watch, because what's really happening is a remembering. And it's kind of getting everything stirred up. This veil that once separated things and separated us from all things has now been removed. When I open myself to receive, my journey can really begin. And the only way that can happen is that I have to have the consciousness and the awareness to make that choice and that decision to wake up. We have to go back to a time before conditioning. We have to go back to a time that encourages us to trust. It encourages us to step into a place that is vaguely familiar to us, but a place that we know nevertheless. And sometimes it is referred to as intuition. Intuition is our rightful place. It is a part of us. It's what we are.
Through reading the teachings of Don Juan, I was seduced into trying to find some of my own magic and to find hidden symbolism and meaning to life. In 1999, I was an art graduate living in Bristol. I frequently visit my family in Finland, staying in a remote woodland cabin during my summer breaks. This one year, I was reading all of the Casteneda books and learning about the lucid dreaming and shifting my perception. I followed the practices while in the remote cabin, believing this would be the perfect time and place to explore summoning a spirit animal. Sat on my porch in silence, looking out over the vast canopy of trees, a red squirrel comes scurrying down a tree and sat directly in front of me. Through half-closed eyes we stared at one another for a few moments, in acknowledgement. In those moments, I felt like infinity, but it was probably only a second. I connected with the forest and the squirrel on a deep level. Before the squirrel ran off, and then somehow I knew I had the power to summon aspects of my reality. It was on some level magic with which I had corresponded with the unseen, unknown world. I since have learned that the squirrel represents playfulness, resourcefulness and fun. Every time I see one now, I remember to lighten up. Could it be, if we truly understood the universe is always speaking to us through spirit, that we could ask questions and receive the answers? If you are here, I imagine you are interested in art, psychology and history, and perhaps all things that are a little bit mystical. I thought I could go a little bit deeper into this subject of how art can be used as a unique transformative tool to explore the subconscious mind through symbolism, archetypes and mythology. I will be exploring some artists who use mythology and archetypes and the subconscious in their artwork and delving into the purpose and meaning behind why. By using these motifs as metaphors, they offer us a window into the depths of the human psyche and give us a better understanding of our own personal mythology. My interest began in trying to decipher the code of my own subconscious in a curious yet haphazard way in my teens and early 20s, through magic and learning about esoteric topics, which I will talk about more in the future videos, but for the sake of time today, let's stick to this subject. After I had a near-death experience, age 21, I decided to stop exploring such topics and resolved in my mind that this was just the afterlife and I should concentrate on trying to fulfill my perceived dreams in this lifetime. But that experience stayed with me and would open up an opportunity later in life to explore other realms. There are many diversions of this journey I could take, which I will talk about further on this channel when it's relevant, but for the purpose of this video, let's assume that I've been on a self-actualization path for many years, which has led me to explore the esoteric and mystical arena. But first, let's talk about symbolism. There is a rich tradition of symbolism in Western art throughout the last 1,000 years, when art has been used as a didactic tool to teach those who could not read. Before photography, art was the most immediate visual means to convey meaning. People of earlier ages would have understood what these symbols and metaphors alluded to, whether it be gold to represent wealth and status, or a skull to symbolize death. Symbolism and metaphor were important aspects in Renaissance art too, as artists sought to convey complex ideas and meanings through their works. Here we will look at a few examples of how Renaissance artists use symbolism and metaphor in their paintings. Sandro Botticelli's painting The Birth of Venus uses metaphor to convey the beauty and purity of the goddess. Venus is depicted emerging from a seashell, which represents her birth and the idea of renewal and rebirth. The painting also includes other symbolic elements, such as the flowers in the foreground that represent springtime and the awakening of nature. Michelangelo's painting on the Sistine Chapel ceiling contains many symbolic elements, including the figures of Adam and God reaching out to touch each other's fingers. This gesture is meant to represent the moment of creation and the connection between humanity and the divine. Some experts believe the angels surrounding God look like a depiction of the human brain in the moment that God gives Adam intelligence. Jan van Eyck's painting, the Arnolfini portrait, is full of symbolic elements that convey the wealth and status of the couple just married. If you can get past his ridiculous hat and the fact that he looks like Vladimir Putin, you might, for example, notice that the chandelier in the background is a symbol of the couple's wealth, and the mirror behind is seen as God's all-seeing eye. Their bare feet showing respect for the religious ceremony, and the small dog, Fido, representing fidelity. Or the oranges on the windowsill, showing that they can afford expensive fruits to ward off scurvy. The opulent decor and overabundance of fabric, symbols of wealth. Hieronymus Bosch's painting, The Garden of Earthly Delights, uses surreal and fantastical imagery to convey the idea of temptation and sin. The painting contains many symbolic elements. The central panel, the garden, depicts a lush idyllic garden filled with various fruits, flowers and animals. The garden to the left represents the world as it was created by God before the fall of man. It is a symbol of paradise and innocence. And to the right is supposedly hell, where man suffers the consequences of his indulgences, selfishness and greed that happen in the middle panel. The landscape is barren, mechanical and hostile, and the surreal figures feel demonic. If you look closer, the fountain in the centre of the garden represents a source of life and creation. It is a symbol of the divine spark that animates all living things. And here the animals in the painting represent various human traits, such as emotions. For example, the owl symbolises wisdom, the peacock represents vanity, and the rabbit symbolises lust. The various fruits in the painting represent different temptations and desires. For example, the apples in the left panel represent the original sin of Adam and Eve, while the strawberries on the right panel represent sensual pleasures. The musical instruments. The various instruments scattered throughout the painting represent the joys of music and the arts. They are a symbol of the pleasures that can be found in earthly life. There's a great deal of nudity in this painting. Most of the figures are nude, and they represent the vulnerability and openness of humanity. It also suggests the idea of being exposed to the temptation of sin. This was a really intense period of personal and spiritual growth for me, learning to be a coach. Because in the process of learning to guide others, I had to unravel my own shadows and deep inner psychological process in order to understand it. During that process, in the classes that we held in a group, we would do certain exercises, and I personally feel, looking back at that time, that those deep self-inner inquiry exercises opened me up to some level to my own subconscious language of symbolism and dreams and metaphors. And I began to start having insights, and with writing in my diaries at the time, it was quite obvious that something was happening for me. I was seeing a lot of synchronicities in my life. I was having prophetic dreams, and also during the group meditations that we would have, I would have some quite profound experiences actually. Some things that you would allude to as being some kind of awakening. One of those deep sort of regressive meditations that we did, and one that I use in my coaching currently, is to find your inner guide. And I feel like in some respects it is tapping in deep into your subconscious and it really depends on your belief system, but I personally believe that we have a connection to a higher source, a creative force that has some momentum and like understanding. It gives meaning to the world in my perspective, and that meditation work connected to my inner knowledge puts me in a direct line to what you might call God or spirit, the all that is, you know. And incidentally, I have recorded that meditation if you are interested in finding that for yourself, and I will put it in the show notes. But that process very much opened me up spiritually, and I was able to access that aspect of my subconscious from then on. As I mentioned, I recorded a lot of this information in diaries I was writing at the time, and I'm just going to show a few pages because I think it's really interesting to see these symbolic elements coming in, like Metatron's cube and the pyramid, like that was bringing some light into my kind of heart chakra, and that was also leading me down a different path of researching some of those topics and putting me down a bit of a rabbit hole, you know. But it all kind of became this path of discovery which led me onto my next stage of my own personal growth, which is something that I'll talk more about in the mythology section, our own hero's journey towards self-realization. Following on from that period in my life, I then started to explore spiritualist circles, and that might seem quite a jump from life coaching, but I think because I had opened up, like there were sort of 3 different channels that pointed me in that direction. I had a very synchronistic link to a person that became a very important spiritual guide in my life, a lady called Diana, and she was working as a Reiki healer at the time, and I was led down the synchronistic path to find her, which is probably something I'll talk in depth more about another time. And I also, in another vein, met someone through a friend of one of my children. It was one of the parents, and he was a established medium, and I didn't know this, but as the universe works in mysterious ways, but he approached me with some information, and he said he felt that it was for me, and it was incredibly coincidental, the information that he gave me, and he knew information about me that nobody would know. And that led me towards working with him, and we formed a spiritual group or a circle with some other parents. And you might say, well, that seems very strange to have in a very small village in the countryside where I live, to have 4 or 5 people with that similar interest and looking to explore and develop it as a skill. We all were looking to develop our mediumship skills, and he sort of volunteered himself to help us do that. And that was a very interesting and expansive experience, because he really taught me how the language of the subconscious mind is made up of symbolism and metaphor, and that is very unique to each one of us. So if you look at a psychic medium, and I will give examples of that in a minute, they will have associations which they will understand because they've built up that relationship with their subconscious through perhaps they call guides, spiritual guides. But what that is doing is really the subconscious is throwing forward information that is going to bring some form of enlightenment for the individual that they're working with. Or it might be the case that the spiritual medium is picking up on the metaphors and language of the person that they're working with. And that's why they often do not understand what they're receiving, because often we see symbols in a very literal way, and that's not how, whether you want to call it the spiritual world or your subconscious, it's one and the same thing. That is not how the spiritual world and the subconscious work. They work in code, pictures, and the deeper level of meaning that will only be understood by us once we decode it. I'm going to read a passage now that I've written about this period, and going into a bit more depth about what that meant for me at the time. So directly after coaching, I began mediumship classes and joined spiritual circles in early 2017. Then I also trained to be a Reiki healer, and through a guide that I met at Spiritual Group. This was a period of rapid learning. I was reading tarot as well on a YouTube channel. I developed my skills of understanding how messages can be decoded, as they often are not literal. I began a daily meditation practice at this time and was journaling my experiences. I noticed during much deeper meditation, I would sometimes see symbols, pictures and words, or passages of text, sometimes more detailed images. I'd like to stop and say I often wouldn't understand what any of them meant. It might seem like gobbledygook, and I think I've mentioned before about some of my earlier sketchbooks have these kind of automatic writing and drawing pieces in them, have since made sense to me in later life, but at the time when I was doing them, they didn't at all. So yeah, when I would find certain images, I might get a word like the Pleiadians. I got once, I remember, and that seemed like very woo-woo in the spiritual community, but I had no knowledge of that prior to receiving certain words, and like Sirius, and that's all linked. I would then go off and Google and research what this meant, and often it would lead me like on the next step of my journey. And I would often find that they were related to kind of ancient knowledge about mythology and gods and ancient history and esoteric subjects that I had no prior knowledge of, but then I would go off and explore them further. And some of those legends and stories relating to those channeled messages would have some significance to my own personal growth, and I would find it would almost like unlock the next stage of my journey, or unlock a door to understanding myself and what I needed at that time. So I began to see this as a process of a series of clues I would decode until I reached my own solution. And this message would often be repeated until I learnt that particular lesson. And by repeating, I mean I would see synchronistic images in advertising, or words in music, or strange found objects in my day, you know, just seeing like a broken necklace with a symbol on it that was significant. And these are the seemingly unexplained coincidences and synchronicities that we just put down to coincidence, and we often don't think. I apologise for the brief end to that video. My camera battery ran out. But what I was trying to get to at the end of that video was the point that through the medium art as well, the artist is always accessing this subconscious place. It's often called the flow state, and specialists in psychology see it's quite a desirable state to reach because it makes you able to access different parts of your brain that you wouldn't normally able to. And that's why I find it interesting how psychic mediums and artists seem to work in a similar way. And I first want to share this video, and it's of John Edwards, and he's quite a well-known psychic medium in the UK. And he's just going to briefly explain in this video how he connects and gets the information that he does. And after that, we're going to explore a little bit further about some artists that have used this ability to use their subconscious mind and dreams and lucid dreams to create fantastical works. Whether you want to call it channeled or not, it's still accessing that language of symbolism that we've been discussing.
a voice? Do you have a feeling?
I like to demystify what this is. I think a lot of people over the years, when they think about psychic phenomena, they think it like in terms of Hollywood, right? They think in terms of what they see on TV. It's really like a daydream. It's an energy. So it's like what you're thinking, seeing, feeling, hearing, all happening simultaneously, like downloaded. Then you're kind of, so I equate it to when you're in school and the teacher was kind of boring and you kind of fogged out and you like stared out the window and you had that thought. It's like I'm having that thought while I'm having this thought. So it's like having two things kind of happen simultaneously. It's really like a daydream. I'm just paying attention to what it is because they're giving me the daydream.
Overall, the use of symbols in mediumship can be a powerful tool for connecting with the spiritual realm and understanding the messages that are being conveyed. By using this language of symbols, mediums are able to communicate complex ideas and emotions that might be difficult to express just in words, and these can provide comfort and healing to those who are seeking connection with their loved ones who might have passed on. Overall, the pictorial language of symbols is ever present in the images that we see around us every day, and can behave as a useful tool to decipher messages and help guide us. Whether you'd like to understand that within the context of science, or the realm of the subconscious, or in a spiritual sense, with these visual references acting as guideposts of our own hero's journey, it can be really helpful. These symbols and synchronicities can be understood as clues for our own life's lessons, as I mentioned before, helping us to grow as individuals and individuate as souls. I invite you to look for examples in your life when the universe seems to be guiding you towards some significant outcome. What are the clues on your path? Those sudden moments of lucidity and direction. Those pings that you just can't avoid. A chance encounter or a sign that you've interpreted to mean something. We can invite the universal collective consciousness that Jung speaks of to guide us in this way. Could it also mean that through the medium of art, an artist reaching a flow state in which they can access such information can bring forward unconscious messages as paintings? Many artists have claimed to work with spirits and guides, and claim that the work comes through them rather than made consciously by them. Whether art is deliberately channeled or simply created through inspired action, it's obvious that some artists are harnessing symbolism as a means of communication. If we look at this painting, Odilon Redon's eye balloon, it's a hot air balloon in the form of an eye that soars above a marshy landscape, bearing a severed head on a plate. He describes this mysterious creature or contraption as mounting towards infinity, which released from the mind and the body leaves behind the physical world to explore what lies beyond. In the fin de siècle Paris, Redon was celebrated by symbolist poets for his interest in making visible this world of dreams and fantasies. My originality, he wrote, consists in bringing to life, in a human way, improbable beings and making them live according to the laws of probability, by putting, as far as possible, the logic of the visible at the service of the invisible. In this comment, I think he suggests the symbolism he's using somehow reveals knowledge from the hidden realms, whether it be our own mind or a greater intelligence. How he wanted the audience to interact isn't so clear, and is often something I wonder about, whether the artist is being deliberately obtuse and mysterious to create their own hype, or they genuinely believe that the feeling and information that they're conveying in their art has of greater purpose. Perhaps one we don't quite understand yet. Quite possibly why Hilma of Klint asked for her work to be kept private for 50 years after her death. Frida Kahlo is very well known these days for expressing her personal journeys in an open and frank manner through symbolism. Her paintings often feature personal symbols and imagery that reflect her own experiences and struggles. For example, in her painting here, The Two Fridas, the two versions of Frida Kahlo are depicted sitting side by side, holding hands. One Frida is dressed in traditional Mexican clothing, while the other is dressed in modern Western clothing. The painting is thought to represent Kahlo's struggle to reconcile her Mexican heritage with her European education and identity. Both women have visible hearts, and one of the hearts is cut open, exposing the veins and arteries. Above the two Fridas, a dark storm cloud looms. In the foreground, a small hairless dog stands on one of the woman's laps. The dog is a symbol of loyalty and devotion. Salvador Dali, a well-known surrealist, almost the figurehead of surrealism in modern art history. Surrealism was an art movement in the early 20th century. André Breton, in his 1924 Surrealist Manifesto, defined surrealism as psychic automism in its pure state, by which one proposes to express, verbally, by means of the written word, or in any other manner, the actual functioning of thought. What the surrealists were trying to achieve was a pure depiction of imagination through the subconscious. They practiced automatic writing and drawing, and much like any new art movement, they were seeking to differentiate themselves from the mainstream, in this case rationalism and literary realism. They were clearly influenced by the developments of psychoanalysis. If we look at what's happening in that time, in early 1907, Jung and other eminent psychiatrists travelled to Vienna to visit Freud and eventually established the Vienna Psychoanalytic Society, with Freud as president. The surrealists believed the rational mind repressed the power of the imagination, weighing it down with taboos. This is certainly reflecting some of Jung's research with dreams and the subconscious. So Dali is known for his symbolism and metaphor in his paintings. In his work, The Persistence of Memory, for example, Dali depicts a landscape in which the familiar objects of everyday life, clocks, ants, and melting watches, are distorted and surreal. Obviously, the clock is an easily recognisable symbol for time, and its condition, as melting with ants crawling over it, is meant to depict the meaningless pursuit of something intangible. Time cannot be controlled, and yet it is elusive and misunderstood, and our memories are deceptive. The arid landscape also reflects this aimless need to quantify and qualify aspects of our reality, when really, outside of the busyness of everyday life, time is passing and is a fragile element of emptiness. Symbolism, archetypes and mythology are all interwoven, and one really can't exist without the other. The symbols often show up in mythology as well as characters that become archetypes. So this is something I would like to explore further now. I think it's fair to say that mythology is woven deep into the fabric of our culture. Whether we consider that obvious or not, these ancient templates are retold in everything we encounter. Myth and fairy tales both serve to teach us about our own humanity and help us to understand our own life's journey within its framework. It gives us something to identify with during difficult moments and bring hope that better times will return. Let us begin by looking at the work of the author Joseph Campbell, who popularised the concept of the hero's journey. Campbell argued that this journey is a universal narrative structure that appears in myths and legends and religious stories across cultures and time periods. Through the hero's journey, we are able to confront and overcome challenges, gaining self-knowledge and personal growth along the way. The hero's journey is really found everywhere throughout popular culture, film, TV, music, anything. that requires storytelling at its core. It's a narrative that I've explored in my life coaching training, the idea that the protagonist has extreme difficulties to overcome. Think of Hercules. And they are rejected by their own people, then return home victorious, often with a magical key to solve problems and help others. These narratives are so deeply embedded in our cultural language and are constantly being repeated and reinforced in our social programming. This begins at a very early age, with fairy tales that are often mirrored in later retellings in adult life, such as Cinderella, The Emperor's New Clothes, or The Frog Prince, each having a moral lesson warning us of something. Look for examples like this modern retelling of Hieronymus Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights, which we looked at earlier, by Slack Studios, warning us of the distractions of modern life. A good example of archetypes and mythology in popular culture is in the show The Sopranos. For example, the character Tony Soprano can be seen as a modern-day anti-hero, embodying the archetype of the flawed and conflicted protagonist. Through his struggles with family, crime, and mental illness, Tony embodies the struggles of the modern man and invites us to consider our own personal journeys of growth and self-discovery. As I mentioned, in fairy tales that we're often taught since birth are interwoven with stories that act as moral compasses, teaching us this template for our own life that we will act out again and again. If you look at fairy tales as metaphors, many describe the division of the head and the heart. For example, the princess and the prince. The prince has a shield to cover his heart, as he doesn't need to feel, because that's the princess's job, and she doesn't need to have a mind, so let's put her in the castle and the tower, because she doesn't have the brains to think in the world. I'll wear this shield, as I don't have the courage to feel in this world. This is a myth, an archetype. We live in a world where we think that emotions have no intelligence, and intelligence has no emotion. We think that mind is power and heart is weak. We think that women have no intelligence and men have no feelings. This is repeated, this dynamic, and it runs in our society continuously. Many artists have taken traditional myths and woven them into their work. A good example is Marina Abramovic, a tremendous performance artist with incredible bravery to show explicit and disturbing narratives that challenge our perceptions of the complex nature of the human condition and consciousness. She has often created experimental performance art that pushes the human body to extremes. In her performance piece, The Lovers, Abramovic and her partner, Ulay, walk towards each other from opposite ends of the Great Wall of China, symbolising the spiritual importance of their relationship. Marina dreamt this performance piece and thought it was perfect, a final farewell to mark the end of their relationship. Ulay started in the Gobi Desert and Marina the Yellow Sea. They both walk an arduous 2,500 miles to reach each other in the middle for a final embrace before going on their separate ways. This piece has been inspired by the myth of Baucis and Philemon, two lovers who were transformed into trees so they could be together forever. By using this myth as a metaphor for love and separation, Abramovic invites us to consider the nature of relationships and the human need for connection. Ultimately, the importance of mythology, archetypes, and the subconscious in art lies in the ability to help us make, as Jung said, the unconscious conscious. By exploring these themes, artists can offer us a window into our own personal mythology, allowing us to relate and confront our fears, our desires and struggles. In this way, art can be a powerful tool for therapy and self-exploration, because we recognise and identify with others' suffering, and in seeing that being overcome, it gives us hope. This guides us on our very own hero's journey, towards personal growth and individuation. Just as in the tarot, the Fool sets out on the journey at the beginning of the arcana to reach the end, having traversed all the challenges in between. So I've talked just about a few examples of symbolism and mythology and archetypes, and this kind of metaphor that comes up in their work. By using those devices, they're able to convey some really complex ideas and emotions that might be difficult to express in words alone. I think in this way, art is really powerful as a tool for exploring the depths of the human psyche and mysteries of the universe. Yeah, what I really wanted to impart in this introduction is I have this really incredible passion, probably my autism. It's my hyper-focus. My specialist subject is understanding creativity, and that has been a real driving force for me for most of my life, but most recently more of an academic way to understand it in a way of how does this process actually work? Is it something that we can decipher scientifically? Is it something that we can explain with physics? Is it relating to history and past knowledge that has or hasn't been passed down to us in slightly more esoteric or coded means? So, there's quite a long journey for me to get to this place to talk about it. And the reason why I'm so passionate about it is because I really feel like it's at the forefront of a new era of knowledge. And I feel that there's something that's going to evolve in us as beings that will help us understand ourselves much better. The way we think, the way we process information, the way we receive guided inspiration. To me, it's all connected. And I think it's very critical. And we are, at the moment, at the dawn of a new era. We're moving into an age of artificial intelligence, which will transform our reality as we know it. And we probably will look back at this time and say that was a revolution. And a lot of astrologers have talked about this time, and ancient civilizations have foretold a time in which we move into a new age, the age of Aquarius. And there are lots of astrological shifts that support that belief. So what's the importance of this? Why should you care? Because it will impact everyone's lives. And regardless of whether you see yourself as a creative person or not, you still are guided to some degree by your thoughts and your gut intuition and those inner intentions that are driving you forward. What I'm really passionate about getting people to understand or know about themselves is that you do have all the inherent knowledge within you. And that's why I trained as a life coach, because I wanted everyone to seek the truth and answers from within themselves rather than externally. Because when you're constantly relying on other people's opinions or thought pieces in the media or being influenced by the world around you, you're really picking up those secondary influences, and it doesn't always benefit you. And this is going to become more important as AI takes over the information age. Everything that we experience in our world now, we won't be able to differentiate where it originates from. And that's not necessarily a problem, but I think what is most important is to understand yourself and be able to listen to your inner voice, your inner rudder, your compass, because I believe that's what's the truest truth for you on your journey in life, and that's all you will have going forwards into your future. Now, in an age where fake news can be imbued with everything and we have no reason to decipher or know what aspects of that are good for us, we have to learn that from within. So I'm looking historically at ancient civilizations, channeled messages. I look at the work that I've done in my mediumship my creativity, all of this intertwines for me, and it has brought up similar themes I want to kind of weave together in this video. And obviously I can't do it all in one video, so a lot of these themes I will go back into more depth in subsequent videos. Anyway, I just wanted to introduce myself, get myself in front of the camera and say hello. So here I am, and I hope you enjoy this video.